all my emerging aficionados and practitioners of this craft. Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of Gameology. I'm your host, Neil K. Marcellus. Yeah, that's checkmate. If you ain't already aware, here on this channel, I draw analogies and correlations from the game of chess and the game of poker to showcase how they both apply to real life and its overall success. Because chess and poker are both ancient cosmologies that go back thousands of years, and they both contain many mysteries and secrets that applies to this street philosophy and the concept referred to as game. Therefore, one of the reasons that makes the game of chess so formidable is the complexity of how one has to play and maneuver its pieces. So for instance, as most of you already know, a chessboard is constructed of 64 individual squares, and it can be played from the lighter or darker shade point of view. Each side, regardless if you initiate the game from the lighter shade or you respond from the darker shade, they both contain or have 20 choices that they can implement for their first move. Calculating this up, this gives us about 400 possibilities and likely outcomes just from the start, from the beginning of a game of chess. Now, peep this out. After these initial moves, they can be continuously calculated so that you would end up with about 300 billion possible outcomes. Each additional move in chess expands the complexity. Now, from a street perspective, and this concept called game, this complexity, it applies to real life as well. So once again, peep this out. I'm going to illustrate how this complexity applies to your everyday life. From the perspective of your current location, your address, you have your surrounding neighborhood. And from your surrounding neighborhood, you have the section of your town or city that you are currently living on. And from your current section of town you are living on, you have the rest of the city. Everything I just previously mentioned sits inside and is neatly tucked away, making up the complexity and the totality of your entire state. Are you getting the picture yet? Each progression from the perspective of your address grows in complexity and magnitude exponentially as you move further and further away from your point of origins. In this example, your address. As for people, activities, interactions, collaborations, all of this is taking place within this concept of complexity, which expands from the point of origins of your address. So size in this context is in conjunction with complexity. And therefore, for this reason, to attain the expansiveness and magnitude to contend with the complexities of life, this is predicated upon if your ego is governed by the Fifth Avenue of servants or the local swap meet of masters. As a consequence of what I just stated, the size of a man's ego governs the proportionality at which he can utilize this philosophy, commonly referred to as the phenomenon called game, which, by the way, directly affects his capacity to handle complexity. Remember, whenever you hear anyone mention that this street philosophy, referred to as game, is simple, then you know you are dealing with a very inexperienced and a naive individual. Iceberg Slim, a renowned grandmaster and a legendary practitioner of this philosophy, once described the complexity of this craft as being equivalent to trying to put together an expensive watch like a Rolex, but only with boxing gloves on. Implying how intricate and complicated this philosophy is if one doesn't possess the proper understanding of how the dots are connected within this discipline. For this reason, when a man struggles with this craft known as the concept of game, then the central issue is his ego, which is undeveloped and deprived of knowledge that gives it the ability to contend with the complexities transpiring and taking place upon this chessboard we call life. First and foremost, ego development is a no-no and a cuss word within the status quo or the square side of society. Check out this fresh image I'm currently showing you now. This image automatically will be interpreted as being someone who is egotistical, thinking that they are better than everyone else. This is their interpretation commonly pushed upon men, browbeating them into compliance surrounding this essential and vital tool that is actually the tip of the spear and the best tool in defeating the difficulties that will dog a man on his every move as he transverses and maneuvers across this chessboard we call life. So the overall consensus and the propaganda-laced Kool-Aid pushed by the status quo or the square side of society is to always label and designate an individual who possesses an ego as being self-centered, arrogant, or simply a straight-up asshole. But from a gameologist and a street perspective, their interpretation of this image is totally different. From a street philosopher's point of view, this is totally legit because the definition as it pertains to the ego is all about self-preservation. So, peep game. For you to be of any benefit to yourself or anyone else, the first and foremost important lesson in being successful regarding the complexities of life is making sure that you are well equipped at securing your own survival. The ego, from a gameologist and a street perspective, is all about being equipped and fully capable, so one can smash through the complexities of life with cleverness and shrewdness. And this starts with an individual being able to secure their own well-being first. And please don't get it misconstrued and twisted. This does not imply that one needs to be cutthroat or heartless. Now remember that quote I shared with you earlier that spoke to the development and the empowerment of one's ego, where it said, a man's ego development is either spearheaded by the Fifth Avenue of servants or the local SWAT meet of masters, meaning proper ego development is accomplished by having a methodology that is so tight and adheres to such detail and exactness that it can be categorized as being the quality and standard that mirrors and is equivalent to a team of servants that you will only find on Fifth Avenue. And for this reason, as for ego development from a gameologist and a street perspective, it's a 4-stage and a multi-tier process. Check out this brand new image I'm showing you now. Developing one's ego to such a lofty position requires different temperament and characteristics. This demands different intensities and energy. Therefore, this methodology I'm presenting to you from on this image is exemplified by using sunlight, with sunlight being used here to represent and is equivalent to knowledge and power. So, starting with stage 1 from on this image, which is the upper right hand corner, it represents the darkness right before the onset of sunlight. And don't equate this stage as being less important than the other 3. This stage offers some of the most powerful attributes for one's ego development. And a lot of problems that a lot of men are struggling with can be traced back to this stage. I will touch on some of these issues here momentarily. The next stage, which is stage number 2, which is the bottom right hand corner, this is the dust phase of ego development. This is referred to as the twilight period. Moving on to the 3rd stage, which is the bottom left hand corner, this is referred to as the coming of the dawn, which is sunrise. And the very last stage, which is the top left hand corner, which is the 4th phase, this is where maximal sunlight is produced and can be conceptualized when the sun is at its zenith, where it's producing maximal sunlight. Subsequently, like I mentioned a few moments ago, when certain key attributes are not properly developed within this 4-stage progression I just laid out, then this is where a man can get stagnant, immobilized, and stifled in his development of this essential tool, which is the fortification of his ego. And this is why the seasoned OGs who was so instrumental in my development always told me that we get from a situation only what we give to it, because our focus will always bring up the rear and tag along behind our delights and our passions. So when a man falls short of the lessons within this first stage from this 4-stage progression and methodology in ego development, then he has a preponderance to choke up and have a problem digesting uncomfortable truths and observable facts. So let me further unpack this issue, which has become so common among so many men. This issue surrounding this first stage of this 4-stage progression in ego development. It pivots around a concept which I refer to as the Adam and Eve fall from paradise scenario. And by the way, I did an entire show breaking down how the Adam and Eve story is not a historical fact and is strictly a make-believe story, and how the story sabotages a man's psyche. Here's the link. Check it out once you get finished viewing this episode. But why I refer to this issue that takes place in this first stage in developing one's ego, the Adam and Eve fall from paradise scenario, is because the Adam and Eve story symbolically represents a fall from paradise and the struggle and anguish of finding the avenue back to this oasis where one is comfortable and well protected. And this fall from paradise takes place within this first stage of ego development primarily because of the discrepancies in answering 3 vital questions. While a man is undergoing the ascension through the necessary steps to secure his graduation from this stage. And these 3 questions is, number 1, what a man is, and number 2, what a man is not, and finally number 3, what a man could be. But hold on, it gets more interesting surrounding this Adam and Eve fall from paradise scenario and those 3 questions I just got through laying out. But the concept of this Adam and Eve fall from paradise scenario, which is predicated also on how efficiently a man answers those 3 crucial and decisive questions. But all of this hinges on a man truly comprehending a concept called the pleasure principle. Check out this brand new image I'm currently showing. Of the utmost importance when a man is undergoing development in his ego in stage 1 in this 4-stage process and methodology in ego development is having a thorough understanding of his pleasure principle. You see, one of the major objectives in attaining success in life is understanding the psychology behind the pursuit of pleasure, which a lot of individuals has a dismal and a disjointed view when it comes to this very subject. So from a gameologist and a street perspective, the pleasure principle has 4 massive components that make up its composition. These 4 massive components are responsible in giving vibrancy to your passions and focusing capabilities. Remember what I said earlier. We get from a situation only what we give to it. But back to this image and exactly how a man becomes a casualty to this Adam and Eve fall from paradise scenario that then makes them a candidate to become choked up and have a problem digesting uncomfortable truths and observable facts. It all has to do with the process of strengthening one's pleasure principle and the other lessons that need to be learned in this stage or in this first stage of ego development. So work with me for a moment as I get back to explaining the scenario going on with this image. This image you're looking at of this hot air balloon, think of this as conceptually as one pleasure principle, and keep in mind that one's balloon needs to be consistently inflated so it can expand and grow so it can perform its duty. Remember, I'd explained at the beginning of this episode about how complexity is a consistent occurrence upon this chessboard we call life. Now, the arrow on this image, it indicates the means by which you inflate your hot air balloon, this pleasure principle. And this requires you to facilitate this process by thoroughly supplying your hot air balloon with a hearty dose of legitimate game, which constitutes what is battle tested and pragmatic. At the same time, you have to contend with the excessive baggage, which is the heavy weights positioned at the bottom of the basket depicted on this image. They represents one's unresolved issues, which is how one becomes a casualty in the Adam and Eve fall from paradise scenario. These unresolved issues occurs when one doesn't properly answer for themselves those three vital questions I mentioned earlier, and also developing certain attributes in one's ego development when making one's way through the advancement in this first stage. It all comes down to managing the deficit that will occur either in one's ability to pump quality air into one's hot air balloon, which is the knowledge which is pragmatic and functional, or severing or reducing the weight, which is resolving or hammering out one's unresolved fears. The all too often and usual way men experience this tug and division in managing this deficit takes place when they are subjected to the whims and intentional indecisiveness of a win-lose mentally driven female. The effects of engineering this Adam and Eve fall from paradise scenario for men who has missed the memo on the necessity of ego development starts with a win-lose mentally driven woman, orchestrating a combination of sexual physical heat and a heavy dose of emotional isolation and keeping her subjects at arm's length. So, peep game. First, a woman with a win-lose mentality would lay the loving on thick and heavy in her pursuit of bringing a man into compliance who haven't properly mastered this first stage in his ego development. Then she would turn around and make the man angry, which creates the circumstances so she seemingly is justified in acting cold and standoffish, which she would then do a 180 and bust it wide open and sexually ravage a man from head to toe. Then afterwards be cooperative and non-confrontational. Then she would hit the replay button and run the man through this whole process again until he is totally under her thumb. And so, like I pinpointed at the beginning of this episode, a man has to determine whether his ego is going to be governed by the Fifth Avenue of servants or the local SWAT meet of masters. And as always, I have barely scratched the surface on how one develops their ego from a gameologist and a street perspective. And of course, I definitely will be doing more episodes on this subject, because when a man is devoid of the proper knowledge on developing his ego, he then truly becomes egotistical and unproductive. And those who are egotistical and unproductive are not confident and will put up little defense in squashing that Adam and Eve fall from paradise scenario that I've been sharing with you. I want to share a saying that I'm confident that you have heard several times before, which goes, "It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog." But for you who just got through listening and viewing this episode, then this saying has a totally different meaning. Now, that's checkmate. Thanks for watching. We'll definitely catch you on the next episode.